Hello there, and a very good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all participants of the International Symposium on Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction. Of course, a very good afternoon to all the participants here live in Sri Lanka at the Bandaranaike Memorial International Convention Centre. This is, of course, the first sort of symposium on on multi-hazard early warning and disaster risk reduction that is being held here in Sri Lanka. It began on the 14th of this month. It's been a very educative and a very informative 2.5-day session on the International Symposium on Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction. Of course, we've had a countless number of participants attending these sessions both here in Sri Lanka and across the globe in the Asian region, the European region, and many other regions across the globe. And we thank all the participants as well as those who presented their research papers. Over 105 research papers were presented at this international symposium. Of course, all good things must come to an end, and today is the third and final day of this international symposium, and it's streaming live. Of course, it's streaming virtually across the world to all participants across the world. And of course, the Disaster Management Center played a key role in organizing this event, the International Symposium, and many other stakeholders. Of course, before we get into the final stages, there are a few more sessions left in the day. On the third day of the International Symposium on Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction, and the fourth session today that will be conducted here is on media and disaster risk communication. Now, as a member of a media organization myself, we know the importance of keeping the general public informed when a disaster is imminent, when a disaster hits, and also in the aftermath of a disaster. We recently saw a cyclone hitting here Sri Lanka, and the efforts of the Disaster Management Center and the early warning that was provided by the Disaster Management Center and communicated to the general public through mass media and other forms of media, how it helped save many lives as well as property in the process is a known fact to us all. So this, of course, is a very timely and important session, and to all those attending, of course, you can look forward to something very informative and something very novel and timely, of course, in the present day. And the panelists, of course, for this session, if I may introduce them, first, Professor Rohan Samarajiva, Board Director and Founder of Learn Asia Sri Lanka. Also, we've got Major General Sudhantha Ranasinghe. He is, of course, the Director General of the Disaster Management Center here in Sri Lanka. And we've also got Mr. Siobhan Daniel, Group Director of the Capital Maharaja Organization. He heads, of course, News First, the Sirasa News Division. And also we've got on the panel Mr. Nalaka Kalueva, the Director General of the Department of Government Information. He was also extremely influential in communicating the information that is being disseminated from the Disaster Management Center on early warning, so on and so forth, to the general public. And of course, the session will be moderated by Dr. Chandaka Siriwardana, Senior Lecturer of the University of Moratuwa here in Sri Lanka. So, Dr. Chandaka Siriwardana, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, and Aibowan from Sri Lanka. So today we are going to start this session with a small note which I have written. Let me take back you to the day of December 26, 2004, Indian Ocean tsunami, the catastrophe that shocked Sri Lanka. More than 35,000 lives were taken, 100,000 houses were damaged, and 500,000 people were displaced. The impacts were devastating. As a second-year engineering undergraduate, I had the first-hand experience in helping the victims of this tragedy. Myself and the friends involved in providing relief services in the Hambantota Divisional Secretariat Division, I saw how people struggled after their loved ones were wiped away within a few minutes, leaving the survivors without shelter and abandoned. No food, no clean water, no electricity, no communication with the outside world whatsoever, and internet is completely out from the picture. However, calamity of this intensity was the turning point in Sri Lanka's disaster management mechanisms. Consequent to the tsunami and the widespread destruction caused, the need for a systematic approach to disaster management emerged, as a result of which the Sri Lankan government introduced the Sri Lanka Disaster Management Act number 13 of 2005 as the legal framework for disaster management in the country in May 2005. The Act included the provisions for the establishment of the National Council for Disaster Management, NCDM, and then Disaster Management Center, DMC. Coming to the global context, the cost of disaster has been almost doubled within the period 2000 to 2019 compared to 2 decades from 1918 to 1999. Climate change is also linked to an increase in the frequency and intensity of disasters caused by the natural hazards. From disaster management, which was the main focus of Hugo Framework 2005 to 2015, global concern has been directed to disaster risk reduction in the Sendai Framework for DRR, shifting the focus from disaster management to disaster risk management. Target 7 of Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, multi-hazard early warning systems have been identified as one of the key aspects in fostering DRR. The scope of multi-hazard early warning is vast and includes 4 key elements: disaster risk knowledge, detection, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting of the hazards, preparedness and response capabilities, and warning dissemination and communication. So as you can see, the warning dissemination and communication is only the last part, but there are other 3 main aspects which are highlighted by the Sendai Framework for DRR. The effectiveness and success of multi-hazard early warning systems depend on these 4 elements. What will happen? The process doesn't function well. Let me give you some examples. We all remember this tragic incident that happened 16 years before in Peralia, Sri Lanka, the tsunami rail disaster. It is the largest single rail disaster in the world history, with approximately 1,700 deaths. If the early warning messages approaching tsunami had reached the train, this tragedy could have been avoided. And recently we experienced the effect of Buravi, how the disaster management authorities, disaster management center, and all the government officials were preparing for the cyclone, which is very impressive. Since all those preparations were carried out amidst of COVID-19, the impacts were considerably lower than had been expected. It was all because of the effective early warning mechanisms and then the preparedness. In multi-hazard early warning and disaster risk communication, media have a pivotal role to play. Currently, media exposure is high only at the time when a disaster event happens, which gets all the attention. Though there are various new modes of media to be used in public communication, people still rely on traditional media such as televisions and radios. That's what our research indicates us. Maybe this is because of the structure in which the information is presented via these modes. With the increase in the new modes of media, people have begun to question whom to trust. This because there is a flood of information as a result of these new modes of communication, such as social media platforms, centralized structured forms of communication. Centralized structured form of communication now have been shifted to a smartphone device connected to a social media handled by a teenager. However, regardless of the growth in the diversity of modes of media, risk communication messages hardly reach vulnerable groups owing to inaccessibility. So we can clearly see that the media's role of disaster risk communication should not only be identified as pivotal, but also managed effectively to earn public trust, cause less confusion, and also reach the vulnerable communities in the last mile. During this plenary session, we hope to discuss these areas as much as we can within the limited time frame. So we have a panel of experts who have gained a plethora of experience and have played an active role in this area, and let me once again introduce them to you. Major General Sudanta Ranasinghe, Director General Disaster Management Center, Sri Lanka; Mr. Nalaka Kaluheva, Director General, Department of Government Information, Sri Lanka, Professor Rohan Samarajiva, Board Chair and Founder, Learn Asia, Sri Lanka, and Mr. Shevan Daniel, Executive Group Director, Capital Maharaja Group, Sri Lanka. And we have structured this discussion into 3 segments. Mainly, we will be focusing of the past and current context, and in the last round, we will be discussing the way forward. So with that introduction, I would like to move into the questions, starting from an expert in the ICT, and then who has played a key role in mainstream internet in Sri Lanka, Professor Rohan Samarajiva. Sir, I would like to ask, like, you are the most experienced person in this subject to ask. So how was the life before 2004? And how was, like, there was no internet, telecommunication was like, we had the smart, like the feature phones which says where we lived in. So how was the life, and how disaster risk communication back in the days, and how it evolved it to current situation?
Thank you. One of the advantages of age is that I can actually go back before you guys were born. So my first experience with disasters and media was cyclone in 1978. Actually, we had 2 that came that year. And I was working in the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation as a news editor while still at Law College. So I used to be doing the night stuff, and I can remember running right through the night, coordinating with the meteorological department and getting the warnings out. Now, the reason I bring this up is that in those very primitive times, our success was actually quite considerable. We had about 300,000 people displaced. We had the tidal wave coming in miles on the East Coast, and we lost only 900 human lives. You take the same kind of phenomenon of a hazard coming from the eastern side of Sri Lanka, and we had about the same number of people displaced with regard to the tsunami in 2004, again with the water coming inland, and we had 30,000 people dead. 900, 30,000. So I look at those 2 numbers and I say, that's the significance of early warning. Not only early warning, but I would like to mention the GA for the Batiklo district, Mr. Anthony Muthu, who was killed by the LTTE. He did an extraordinary service in actually doing the proper evacuation, managing the evacuation, because not only is warning necessary, but then you got to take the people out, right? So those were very important lessons that we took as we went into looking at the 2004 tsunami. One of the differences was that the only electronic medium, now remember, time is absolutely important. Everybody in the disaster field knows that minutes and seconds are important. I have visited the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, and they've got a chart on their notice board which shows what their performance is. 14 minutes, 6 minutes, how quickly did they process the geological information, and how quickly did they get the warning out, right? So that time is important. So when you think about that, you have to realize that we have to then really focus on electronic media, which is what is capable of dealing with those short time intervals. So what we had essentially with the tsunami was, we had 90 minutes for the tele-tsunami. The technical term that is used is a tele-tsunami, to come from Aceh to here. And then we had several hours while the thing was wrapping around the country. So we had 90 plus, right? And yet we were not able to get the warning. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? We failed. Now the question is, at that point, with the cyclone, you could say that we had much longer. We also had, in terms of media, an easier problem, because we had only one electronic medium in the country. And I was sitting right in the middle of that. We had 6 channels, 2 in Sinhala, 2 in Tamil, 2 in English, and it was one place, right? So when I am talking to the Met department and I'm saying, here's a bulletin, I go, I type it up, I give the 2 carbon copies to the 2 guys on my 2 sides, and it's translated, and it goes. That's it. So now we have a more complex situation. And one of the things that we have to do is to use things like common alerting protocol, because these found all over the world. You have to have standard language, standard templates, standard formats to get the information out, so that there's nobody makes us a typing mistake, or translation errors and so on. So we ran a research project here where we piloted the world over. The first multilingual common alerting protocol trials were run here by my organization and by Sarvodaya in tsunami affected villages. So I think that's a major area that we have been talking to the DMC at various points. That's a very important area. I think we have to be diligent about using common alerting protocol throughout the system in using this information. So that basically, what a hazard is, what an alert is, all those things are in the template. The words are negotiated. People don't have to make spot decisions. You just slot in. Is it a tsunami? Is it a flood? Is it a cyclone, etc.? Is it severe? Those are government decisions. You just slot the words in, and then it seamlessly moves through the system. So I think that's something we didn't have at that time. We were basically reliant on phone calls. I can remember, I think we had a whole series of sort of tsunamis or tsunami scares. Indonesia actually got hit by several new tsunamis in 2005. And I can remember media here were quite frantic about trying to get the warning out, trying to be responsible, trying to not give wrong information. That is also very important, not to give wrong information. So I think we made a lot of progress there. And of course, the government structures where the government has to make the call, is this an evacuation order or not? That's not something left for media or private individuals or the kind of organization that I'm associated with. That's not for us to do. That's a government call. So what we need to do, what we were planning to do was, and we did, is to get people ready to receive this information. When the government calls, when the government warning comes, people are ready. And they are capable of deciding between high quality, authoritative information and possible disinformation, misinformation kinds of things. So that's the kind of thing that I think civil organizations can do. So I think, we have come a long way. But let me just finish with one point. I think we have been, you go back to 78 or 2004, we were doing national warnings. Now the whole trend is we need to give information to Hambantota. And we don't have to give that same information to the Putlam district. We have to give, if at all, different information. So that targeting is now possible with the technology. And I'll talk about how that can be done using mobile technology and so on, that the availability is now there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And then I really like the where you end this your speech, where the importance of having government endorsement, the authority of the government to where to people to believe. So we have Mr. Nalaka Kalugava as also Major General Sudantha Ranasinghe. So I will start with Major General. The establishment of the disaster management center and then the provisions given in integrated into the disaster management center on communication, like emergency operations center, 24/7 call centers, and then how you communicate with the media in case of a disaster, like after tsunami until today.
Well, thank you. Disaster Management Center of Sri Lanka is designed and developed from, I think, after tsunami in Sri Lanka in meticulous way, where the structure of the Disaster Management Center is laid out, where we leave no stone unturned. It starts from planning and preparation as a separate division. And then we have awareness and training division. There we go down to the last man, last mile, and we keep everyone educated on the programs and do's and don'ts and the difficulties and possible threats and possible disasters. Then we have the mitigation division where we have a professional handling and understanding, mapping out, learning the past and understanding the present and developing the informations into intelligence and developing artificial intelligence on ground, on map and developing data. Then having future forecast, and then have the emergency operations center where we have action station where a 24-hour operation room, and then connected with that 24/7 call center with 117 number. Together with all these professionals and planning, preparedness, early warning, awareness, action plans, all that, the Disaster Management Center today is a fully fledged organized establishment where we will have all areas explored and ready for action. It was proven in last cyclone which came in Sri Lanka. We started our preparation 3 days before, and everybody was informed. Number of media stations came up. I think we went to all the media centers, media stations, and we kept everybody informed, and everybody knew exactly when it will come, how it will come, on what path it will come, where it will come, on what date, at what time, and where they should go. So this is the effectiveness and the preparedness and the level of alertness of Disaster Management Center as at today. Now connecting this into media. When we talk of media, it's not only radio and televisions. The today's world, we have the other sorts of medias, the public media, the WhatsApp groups and Vibers and all these social medias. Then we have printed media. And more than all that, we have the verbal media, the talk of people, mouth-to-mouth media. That's the worst case scenario. Mouth-to-mouth media, some people may talk it gossips. So these are the worst things. That's why certain social medias have been called gossip media. So this is the dangerous part of media. Now coming back to the action part, however much we study, analyze, learn, make our safeguards, prepare, make our preparations, and keep people aware of it, and informed people when to go, where to go, how to go, with our sticker markings, route markings, and all that. Timely reaching the people is the most important thing. For that, Disaster Management Center with our National Emergency Operations Center at the head office is on a technical upgrading and scientific upgrading as at now. And then we are in a process of developing 25 districts into district emergency operation centers, which will get connected with Triforces, the military officials for search and rescue and other post mitigation activities or post action. So the plans are underway to have the connectivity from the National Emergency Operations Center to the District Emergency Operations Center, then getting connected with Army Operational Headquarters, Navy Operational Headquarters, Air Operational Headquarters, Police Headquarters, plus then reaching the community. For that district level, our district disaster management committees has developed district level, reaching the last man kind of groups, WhatsApp groups, Viber groups and webinars, and our disaster management center also has developed a web portal called Apada. So these systems has all the facilities of reaching the people. Now the million-dollar question is, in a serious disaster, will the technology work? Will there be failures in communication? Will there be situations where all communications will fail? So in such scenarios, we had a system called satellite communication connectivity with 77 towers. Again, we are in the process of developing this communication towers where if everything fails, at least we will have some system of functioning. Plus, we have VHF and HF communication systems where, in addition to the national types of media, the social media, the radio, telephones, and televisions, over and above all those areas where we'll have the VHF and HF communication network, again in the process of development. We have a lot of work to do, and we'll be doing it. We'll be completing all these things sooner than the later, and with all that, we'll have everyone connected. So it's radio, television, the print media, the social media, the mouth-to-mouth media, over and above all that. Then the personal interaction is also important. When we keep people informed, this personal interaction will also carry the message down to the last man. So keeping people aware, having the systems, making sure the systems won't fail, and making sure we have alternate methods of communication, making sure the connectivity with national, social, as well as most importantly with international communication systems, international media, international networks. And that is not going to be good enough if we don't have the institutional connectivity. Now, when we talk of disasters, situations, media, then again the most important area, again another important area rather, is getting connected with Met Department, speedy connection with Met Department without waiting for fax machine to come in, some kind of a speedy method. Just email is good enough kind of a scenario without having the personal signature and endorsements. Then have the connectivity with irrigation department, having the connectivity with GSMB, having the connectivity with National Building Research Organization, and having interactions at least monthly, understanding each other and the systems and protocols is very important. I think that's good enough for the foundation. I think I spoke long. Then let me give the mic to the next one, and I'll have my second session also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you have covered the points which I wanted to ask in the second round also, so I can skip some of the questions from the second round. So I still remember in 2004, December 26, Tsunami Day, it was the Poya, and then Poya Day programs were telecast in traditional media channels. So when in that people got to know about the tsunami, I still remember in one of the media channels, it was telecast in Kande Vihara, and then people were flocking into that Kande Vihara. So when that shows the importance of traditional media channels of disaster risk communication. That was my first experience. When I say this, use this term, I think I know that Shivan doesn't like the term, the so-called the traditional media. But still, I would like to use that term because we have a very close closeness. It's in our heart where we grew up, where the TV and radio in the center of our house, and then we as a family watching the house. So we were connected back in the days, but now we were dispersed using the smartphones and so on. So in your opinion, Shivan, what do you think? What is your role of traditional media back in the days until now? Before the social media and then all this internet, and how it has been. And also, I want to ask this question also as a follow-up, where disaster response, like how these media channels were, when they started to engage with the disaster response, like mainly with the Sahana Yatra and so on, where did it was start? So with that, please elaborate more.
Thank you, Dr. Chandana. Just before I answer your two questions, a quick thank you and deep appreciation to the Director General of the Disaster Management Center, Major General Sudhanta Ranasinghe, Mr. The rest of his team, obviously, and my team as well, led by Sampath Dissanayake, who heads our Weather Bureau, the stakeholders involved in organizing this session. It's an incredibly important session, quite honored to be involved in it. I think the role of traditional media and the evolution of traditional media is quite interesting in that while technology has changed, we've gone from, as you said, sitting around a television and listening to the news to sitting in our rooms or wherever we are consuming news and information on our mobile phones. That obviously has changed. I think the importance of professional reporting and the difference between information and news remains the same. And I think particularly if we were to look at the experience of the recent COVID disaster over the past couple of months, the importance of curated news, curated information, professionals assessing the weight of a particular piece of information before presenting it, so that people could make a decision that could mean the difference between life and death, as opposed to consuming various pieces of information on social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and being confused and making a wrong decision. I think that contrast was quite clear during the COVID situation. So similarly, it's easy to understand how important news, professional news reporting is when you consider how a professional news operation works. So I can give you the example of my own news network, but of course I'm not saying I'm the only news network that puts in this much of effort. There are others. But we take our news extremely seriously. It's a 24/7 job. The News First team, for instance, worked right throughout the COVID lockdowns. They were based within our newsroom. They slept in the newsroom. They cooked their own meals so that they could report professionally, because the people wanted the right information. Now, it's the same thing for reporting on disasters. During the Burevi cyclone, we were assessing as much as perhaps the Disaster Management Center, as Major General said, we were assessing all the international websites. We've subscribed to other websites. We were talking to Nalaka and his team. We were talking to the Med Department, the Irrigation Department. Not that we were reporting on any of this, but we wanted to really assess and be very knowledgeable as far as possible on what was going on. And that's kind of the role of a media organization as well. And then once we get the right direction, as Professor Samarajeva quite rightly pointed out, the responsibility of announcing a lockdown or an evacuation is up to the government. But once that announcement is made, it's also important that it is dispersed and disseminated responsibly. And so understanding what you're reporting and providing a lot more information along with just an evacuation, and helping people make sense of what you're reporting is extremely important as well. The other thing is feedback. It's today with the advent of new technology, it's not only about just telling people what they need to know, but also getting their own feedback. The fastest way we've found is to ask people to send us information, WhatsApp it or whatever, on a particular situation developing, so that we can then assess what's going on in a particular region, and then reporting on it as well once it's been assessed. So I think to answer your first question, the first part of your question, it's very, very important that everybody understands how important a responsible professional news operation is. But having said that, it is now a time where that professionalism has also to contend with the eventual advent of technology. But the responsibility is also with all of you. Now, if you ask the traditional media to be responsible, well, then you need to understand also that this in your hand shouldn't be used like a monkey with a knife, or basically. Okay? So it's important that you understand that just because you have a mobile connection and a mobile phone, and just because you can type a few sentences on Facebook, it doesn't make that statement right or wrong. Okay? And if you have that responsibility in your hand, then you need to use it responsibly. And take those who do it for a professional, for a job, who have dedicated their lives to it, take them seriously. And you might not agree with everything they say all the time, but you also need to understand that they're doing a role. They are professionals. So the example I like to use is, if you need to get an operation done on your body, say you have some illness and you need to go through surgery, you will look for the best surgeon. Now that surgeon might not be a very nice man, he might not be very friendly, he might be quite rude, he might tell you what you don't want to hear, but you will not mind all of that because you know that the success of the surgery is very high if he carries out the surgery. So it's similar to a news organization. You might not like the owners of the news organization, you might not like what they say, but at the end of the day, if they are serious about reporting, and even you might not even like what they tell you, you might not like to hear what they say, but it's a belief in the truth, I think that is ultimately important. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Shivan. Maybe we can come back to that Sahana Yatra and disaster response in the next round. So that where you end is the exactly very good point where I can start with Mr. Kaluwewa, where the importance, like the two keywords, if I take from your note, that is the responsibility and the professionalism. So with that note, Mr. Kaluwewa, so I would like to ask you, like the importance of government endorsement in information dissemination, and then your role in it as the media spokesperson of the government.
Thank you, Dr. Chandana, and let me also start my kind of a brief with a kind of appreciation for the organizers of this very timely seminar, international kind of a seminar. And for the special thank goes to especially the local organizers as well as international organizers. And nowadays, I mean, like last 11 months, we are facing this kind of a situation daily. And this disaster communication and risk assessment and all sort of these theories, and those theories become a real life practice these days. Every day we are getting a kind of a new information and which affect our life. With this COVID, I think that is the experience we are getting right throughout. So there is no good time than this to discuss this topic. What is the role of media and how should it be more effective and efficient? So if I go back to your question, Doctor, I think in our case, I mean, as I'm sitting here in the capacity of Director General Government Information, it's my duty to explain, especially the international audience, what is the Department of Government Information and what is the role of it. So Department of Government Information is not the new organization, and this is one of the earliest established department in Sri Lanka. We are having around 70 years old history. So that means I'm in full agreement with all the comments made by all our learned panelists. Sri Lanka is a country which are having a very good system actually. We are having the infrastructure. Even the 70 years ago, we are having a centralized department which handles the information. That is the government information. Even our colonial rulers, they very correctly identified and established this mechanism. From the Department of Government Information, as you explained, we are kind of an interface between government organizations, all the government communication and the media. We are the interface and the general public also. Nowadays, we are not only dealing with directly with the media, but we are having direct communication with the general public also. So that system is there. But only issue is here that means that I mean, like I'm talking about say 7 or 8 decades now, even more than that. So during that period, the technology has changed a lot, and technological advancement. And I'm also the issue is to what extent we as organization or we as institutions we able to kind of organize or use this technology in efficient and effective way. So if I refer the 2004 case, that is the case you are referring. During that period also, if I present some statistics, especially for the international audience, in Sri Lanka we are having around 48 television stations. Even during the 2004, I think there can be very few less, but more or less there were all these TV stations were there. And we are having around 70 radio stations. We are having around 70 odd daily newspapers. And during that time, even during the I'm not referring about 1978 situation, as during that time, I think during that time, as Professor Samarjeev explained, during that time we had only one television or radio station. But in 2004, issue was even we had some kind of a SMS and mobile connectivity also there. We had not like nowadays, but obviously, but. The issue was, and then the issue, what is the issue that during that time? That is that we haven't had any kind of organized communication mechanisms, or there is no flow of information. There is no pre-arranged flow of information. That is the issue we had during 2004. I think that is the eye-opener that even as you explained, during that time period, during the tsunami comes, during that time, the Poe Day, and we also watching the television. We were watching the television, right? So, but even once it happens, even after 5-6 hours, nobody knows what has happened really. And I can remember that Chevan was the anchor there during that day they had the full day tsunami coverage, the coverage there, and a lot of air, and he was the main anchor there. I can remember he speak both the local Sinhala language and English, and then he was the main anchor. Still, I can remember how he emotional when how he become emotional when he present the cases. So that is there. So my point is here in Sri Lanka, not in many other countries, according to my understanding, sometimes they are still trying to establish the mechanism, the communication, disaster or other communication mechanism. But in Sri Lanka, fortunately, we are having that mechanism in place. But only thing is we have to capitalize it. So establishing institutional arrangement is the challenge. And then about your question about the official communication, yes, we are having a flood of information everywhere. And so once it comes to then there should be a kind of a official endorsement always. But that is the challenge. But we have to understand in order to successful as a government organization or as a key organization in this field, in order to success in or make a kind of a effective presence there, we have to ensure that we understand all the media dynamics there. Then nowadays the how fast you get information. So even the official version you have to make available within that short time period, or otherwise that everything can become a chaos. So that is my, at this point, later we can discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Then definitely what you said is very correct. So then like the adaptation to the from starting from 1978 to 2004 to now. So I will get back to you with the use of more modern technologies by the Department of Government Information. Professor, so with that note, what do you think? Are we there yet? When you are a person who is dealing with the international international researchers, and then you have exposed to many technologies available. So what do you think about the current infrastructure availability of Sri Lanka?
There are these two issues which I think disaster professionals will understand. There's the monitoring of hazards. Has a earthquake happened? Is it generating a tsunami? Is a flood likely? Is a landslide coming? Those are scientific subjects, and we can have technology for that also. Then once those scientific facts have been processed by the government, if all these facts are incomplete, that's why we want the government involved to take responsibility for that decision to evacuate, etc. Then we have the problem of communicating. Again, now we have technology. So I'll illustrate this using a current example that is operational in Bangladesh and in India and is under discussion for operation in Sri Lanka. So as you know, we have a big problem with floods. The 2016 Kalani flood actually caused more damage in terms of documented, reported damage suffered by insurance companies and by companies than the 2004 tsunami. That's almost difficult for me to understand, but that was the reality. Because insurance and so on, they were not counting what actually happened in 2004. But here, it hit factories. It hit very important economic infrastructure. And as I was saying at a previous meeting, it hit people who had just bought cars, who had, new cars that people rising from the middle classes had purchased. They got destroyed by that flood. So if we can, now the question is, the warnings were there, but they were not precise enough. It didn't say, at such and such time, in Hangwella, the water will rise this high. It just said there's a flood coming. And people don't react to that kind of general information. Now we have the technology, and I'm hoping it will be operational by next year, where if the irrigation department gives the river gauge information that they have, and some rainfall data also can be obtained, historical data as well as recent current data, Google has volunteered to offer an AI-based model, machine learning-based model, to train a system so that we'll be able to give very precise predictions about water levels and times. So this is combined with another source of data, which is about height, about river levels in the river, the land height. Hydrological is one, and there are two terms. Hydraulic and hydrological information will be fed in, and I arranged for this presentation at the Ministry of, at the Department of Irrigation. The engineers there, they know what I'm talking about. Only difference is that in the old days we used to do kind of crude mathematical models. But here we are not doing crude mathematical models. We are training the model, a relatively simple model, with machine learning from that's coming from the past, and then real-time data will be processed. So that then we know what the situation is going to be in Hangwella, we know the situation is going to be in Kaduvela, we know the situation in Kotikavatta. So now we can give more precise information to people. So that is the science side of it, the monitoring and side of it. Now the question is, how do we get it to the people in Kotikavatta versus people in Hangwella, right? So when we were working after the tsunami, we thought, again, I mean, I'm a former Director General of Telecom, I should know this stuff. But at that point, we said, it's unlikely that we'll be able to rely only on one technology. We worked on two. So we had Raytheon and a company called WorldSpace offer us technology that they specifically designed where we could get spot beams from a satellite. Unfortunately, the company WorldSpace went bankrupt. So that, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. The other technology is something called cell broadcasting. Now, the way you understand cell broadcasting is it's not SMS. It may look and act like SMS, but it's not. So when I was visiting my daughter in Missouri, I'm roaming. I'm a Sri Lankan with a Sri Lankan phone connection in the state of Missouri in the United States, and I get flood warnings on my phone. Because the system sees me from as in that geographical area. And it's giving me the information for that geographical area, right? So that is one way we can do it. The other way that Google, now that can be done, you don't need smartphones for that. Sri Lanka has got cell broadcasting I have had many meetings with the DMC. The DMC knows about cell broadcasting. The phone companies know about cell broadcasting. The software is in place. It can be done in Sri Lanka. Right? Now comes the next one. Google is also offering to use the Android operating system. Now about 50% of our people have smartphones. Actually the real numbers from the data are lower, but I am saying 50 because I think during the last 6 months and the COVID, people would have got more phones. So let's say 50, 45, 50, somewhere there. Now, among that, I would say about 80-85% would be Android. So Android operating systems, they are saying they can give the government the functionality of taking these targeted geography-specific warnings generated by their system. They can push them out to Hangwella and Kaduvela. So now these are the technical possibilities, and I'm not talking science fiction. I'm talking about something that we can very easily do by next year. They need time to train the software, but it can be done by next year.
Thank you very much, Professor. Like that, I think impact-based risk communication, which is localized, if I put it into the key terms. I will be moving next to the Major General Sudanta Ranasinghe about, like, we have seen vast difference, like when you compare to previous times, like where disaster management center approaching media during last few months, or the like maybe after you taken the seat, and then, like, for example, during the Buravi cyclone, you were there in the media stations with all the high level officials talking about the Buravi and then educating the public. And also, we have seen the technical agencies collaboratively working together with the media, and their inter-organizational collaboration also was there. What actions you have taken, sir, to strengthen that? That is also communication, right? So what actions you have taken, and what was your thought behind that?
Chandra, can I start with the Professor Cell Broadcasting?
Of course, sir. Yes.
Thank you. So, getting another step forward from the cell broadcasting, about a month back, we initiated a program to get connected with all service providers in Sri Lanka, where we had 2 meetings, and unfortunately with certain developments of COVID we couldn't process, where what we tried was to get all service providers to get connected with us on the cell broadcasting theory, but not into that high level of technology because it's yet to come in 2021. But we thought we'll start somewhere, and where what we are trying to do is to get connected with all these service providers, because in Sri Lanka, 99.9 people will carry a phone, even bigger than people on streets. Everybody carries a phone, and everybody is connected with another service provider. So if all service providers can get connected as one group under the umbrella of situations, or under the umbrella of emergency, where we have one common platform to convey the message to the last man scenario, this projection of the information to the last vulnerable person is, we can reach at least up to 90% of communities. It's something where we thought of developing a kind of a tsunami call, a dedicated tsunami call, where my statement was it should be something where even a deaf man will wake up from his slumber. It should be kind of a screeching call where all the communication providers in one go will give this tsunami. We'll have 2 calls. First one is the alert call, the next one is evacuation call. Then taking the message down to the last man is at least up to 90 or 95% we will reach with this connectivity and the cell broadcasting theory. Then coming back to your communication and going into media, Of course, we understand media is very important. That is what will carry the message to the people. But that is how competent, how confident you are, and how reliable you are. If you are not reliable, if you are not talking facts, and if you are not telling the reality and the real truth to the people, you will lose confidence. Then however much you reach people, however much preach certain things to people, people will not listen. So that's why the connectivity is very important. The connectivity with technical agencies, connectivity with scientific analyzing, and connectivity with scientific predictions, then connect with the media and other service providers to carry the message, then winning the confidence of the people. As Professor was saying, the irrigation, the Met might say so many warnings, but if we don't have the confidence of the people, it will be like people, it's just another call. It should not be just another call. Whatever we say, whatever information we give, whatever warning we give has to be firm and complete truth, and it should be real. Otherwise, we lose confidence. So that is why when Buravi was coming up, including the Secretary of Defense, we all went down. Of course, it was not like tsunami. Tsunamis, we will have just maximum 1 hour, 1.5 hours. So for that, we had to be prepared, ready, plans done, rehearsals done, then early warnings done, all that. That's a different scenario. It's the most difficult scenario. Because recently we tried our national tsunami exercise, tabletop exercise. We started the exercise and we were doing the first protocol, first round, second round, third round, and I just checked the time. Even when we tried to convey the message to people, so 45 minutes gone. So that was tabletop exercise. Just imagine the real time one. So we had to do rehearsal. So tsunami is a complete different scenario. Now, coming back to the cyclone what we had warnings. So we had 2 days warning. We had enough time. We had enough early warning. We had enough time to play around. So we had that comfort of reaching people with adequate time frame, running to all the media centers in the world, in Sri Lanka. Then of course media was very good with us, and they gave us 1 hour's prime time with all the media channels. We had Secretary of Defense all came in. We educated people and told them exactly what it was, and people were ready. So that was the connectivity, and we are continuing to be connected, and we have been doing a lot of programs with MTV and even other channels as well. The government channels also have been very cooperative and coordinating with us. So we are going to continue with that connectivity. So connectivity, winning the confidence, have all service providers together with us, and reaching the last person. Those are the key areas. Having technology, science, and all the theories is not good enough if we can't reach the last man. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you nailed it, like saying like the way you structure the communication for tsunami is different than a cyclone and some other hazard. Shevan, what do you think? I want to ask you about the survival of your traditional, so-called traditional media channels in this era of social media and then the widespread of technology. So other thing is that how do you adapt into these new technological platforms, and then if you structure your top points around the disaster risk communication, what is your approach and how to move forward?
I'm just going to address your second question of in the first session first, and go to come to this. So just to speak very quickly about Sahanyatra, which our first experience was sometime in 2002 for a drought in the south, and then obviously the tsunami of 2004. When you're a media network and you're dependent on correspondents and reporters who live in various parts of Sri Lanka, you're very connected to these parts as well, to these regions. And when one of these areas faces some sort of a problem, you feel a responsibility that goes beyond just reporting about it. And this was what happened to us in 2002, more than 20 years ago, with the advent of Sahanayatra, where we felt that we could provide and be a platform to support people with the various measures of relief. The drought Sahanayatra that we did was almost a dress rehearsal for the huge, enormous Sahanayatra that we were able to do during the tsunami with, of course, the support of all stakeholders. Now, this is the key point here. Even today, I think the success of whatever we do is because of our stakeholder partnerships. The DMC today, the Government Information Department, the military, the police, organizations that we work very closely with like APAD, and of course the Sri Lanka Life Saving Association today. All of these organizations for us are vital partners in whatever we do. I must have missed out a few, I apologize, but they're vital parts of what we do. And we are just one cog in that wheel. And in a sense, we have the advantage of having 8 channels, TV and radio, and of course a massive digital media presence as well. So that's the advantage we bring to the table. But it's not possible for us to just use it as a medium of promoting our own selves if we don't work with everybody else. Ultimately, we must focus on how can we benefit the people, the communities that we are serving. So Sahanayatra gave us a massive wide array of experience. We understood how important logistics is, how important working with stakeholders are, responding very quickly. We've done more than 50 Sahanayatras to date, 50, small and large. We even sent some relief to Nepal during the earthquake. And we've got a really well-designed in-house program of reacting very quickly in the event that we need to launch a relief program. But over and above that, I think it's also important that I say that the approach that Sirasa has to disasters is fourfold. We've now understood that it's not only relief, but it's also preparedness. And for this, I must appreciate the work that we do with APAD, because together with APAD and government agencies in the local levels, we've been able to go to villages using our Gamma networks as well, and help people prepare for disasters, prepare for floods, help them understand the importance of moving out, moving away, and what they should be doing when they move away, best practices, etc. And then, of course, when a disaster strikes, or when we are expecting a disaster to strike, reporting accurately, as I spoke earlier. Going beyond reporting from that point is also important. That's where relief comes into play, and that's where Sahanayatra comes into play. Going beyond even relief, over the past 1 or 2 years, we've also got ourselves involved in search and rescue. So we've trained several of our staff members in various aspects of search and rescue to go at the IRA as well, not with the expectation that we'll be going and rescuing people, but it's important also that as a media network, we understand how precious and important that role is that the military perform or the Sri Lanka Life Saving Association might perform. So it's important for us to understand that, and I think it's been a wonderful learning curve in a sense to work with all of these stakeholders in putting together a very concerted 360-degree effort in approaching disasters. To answer your question of will traditional media survive, not in the state obviously that we've known it to survive. I think professional reporting will survive, certainly. The value of professional reporting, as I spoke earlier, is becoming more and more important. And the medium, the technology, the platforms in which these reporting will take place will change, but the organizations that focus on professional reporting and reporting on the truth, as opposed to reporting on something that is based on some sort of agenda, as the Major General said, people will decide what is the truth and what is false, what is a fallacy. And ultimately you can fool some of the people all of the time, all of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. So that's the simple theory. I think we'll survive.
I wish you all the best then. Thank you, Shravan. And then I will be moving into Mr. Kaluwewa. So, like we have seen, I think you have taken drastic actions to streamline the media communication through the official channels. I don't know how you do it, now the social media channels are up there, and then like I try my best to keep updated with the news. Like I have put my alerts on the smartphone. Government media channels were there with in par with the private channels, and also like the social media, like keep up now. You are keeping up with the social media channels as well. So what is your experience like with that also? What is your experience with the COVID-19, managing the COVID-19 pandemic information dissemination? So and also how to manage the facts, and then like filter out the false information from the truth.
Yes, Chandan, it's a very good question. Anyway, I'm also in kind of agreement with Shevan, because like this is a very common type of argument all the time, saying that the traditional media is losing their kind of importance and everything. But I'm not believing that, because like at the moment, even, I mean, like if you consider the media dynamics and all the media environment, we are having a kind of a very mixed type of media apparatus. Say, for example, there can be mainline media, there can be mainstream media, there can be social media, but I don't think that any of these types can overtake other. I mean, that is a common observation. I mean, very popular kind of idea. They are having it, but in practical sense, that is not. Even in our case, we are using all these platforms. I don't think that no one, I mean, is confined only to one platform. So even in mixed way, we are using the mainstream or the traditional media as well as social media. But the issue here is to what extent we are using this media. Media platforms are available. I'm very optimistic about all these things, and I'm taking this as a positive, I mean, kind of a support we are getting. So, say for example, the social media, a lot of people blame about it, saying that there are a lot of rumors are spreading and then information flood and all. But I feel if we are wise enough, we can use that for our advantage. That is the social media also. So here in your question, so my approach here as a Director General Government Information, I'm trying to maximize all these channels. I mean, use of all these channels. Say for example, we have to understand the environment all these organizations operate. Say for example, for a mainline media or mainstream media organization, time is the precious thing. So even for a news bulletin or anything, they are actually fighting with the time. So they can't wait. I mean, like somehow or other they have to get the information. So to make our presence, I mean, like significant. Say for example, I'm representing the government. If we need to make our presence significant, then we have to understand their dynamics. Say for example, we have to provide the information on timely manner and in a very quick way. So that is the first thing. And we must have the kind of a network by using what we are providing we are disseminating information. Say for example, in this for last 2 years, as a Department of Government Information, we have established the dissemination network with all media channels. That is including the social media. Whatever information that can be website, Facebook page, anyway, mainstream media, any media channel will provide information. We are having a network or system technology to provide that any kind of a government information within seconds, and everybody get the information simultaneously. That is very important, because there is no any favoration of giving information. So everybody gets information on real time. So that is the first thing. And then to answer your question, that link is there, and the other thing is getting the correct information with from right sources. That is where the networking is very much important. If I take this COVID as a example, say daily we are issuing all the statements saying the numbers and all government communication issues. However, but as a Director General of Government Information, that is my duty to get the correct information before I disseminate it. Otherwise, if I communicate the wrong, or I mean like some misinformation or disinformation, that can lead to lose the trust, especially among the media personnel. That is very important, because like at the moment, if we continue with that passion, then we can, I mean like that they all believe us and they depend on us, and they are with us. That is the most important thing. So and for that, that we all the stakeholders, even in all in this, all the COVID, maybe it may be COVID, may be Buravi, or it may be another disaster. All the stakeholders must be intact, and they have, and they are we have to understand who are the information points, right? Information from where we have to get the information, and we must have the networks. And networks, and for the networks, we have to use all the newest technology. We cannot complain about it. The world, this media world is moving so fast, and we have to be with them. So that is the main kind of a strategy we are adapting, and our social media presence is very much. Yeah. And all the time, if I take little time, there's a very common kind of a argument saying that in social media there is no much information, and that is where the government must play a role, and our presence must be there. If the government and official confirms information are also on social media, then the people are having option to choose. Or they can look into unofficial or unconfirmed news as well as the confirmed news. So our presence is very much there. During the last months, we have increased our presence, and we are having like thousands now in our Facebook, Twitter, and all these things. That is why nowadays the Department of Government Information in social media also. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaluwewa. And this is now we are moving into the last round of this discussion. Here I would like to focus more about the reaching the last mile and ethics and the social responsibility. So starting with Professor Rohan Samarajiva, I would like to ask, so there are a lot of information, as Mr. Kaluwewa was also explaining, and in this sea of information, how to filter out what is correct, and then is there any way that we can use the technology to filter out this information and check the facts? I know that Facebook has already integrated that.
This is a multi-hazard event, which is how it should be. So if you recall, we started with cyclones, which is very large scale, and you have a lot of time. And then we talked about tsunamis, which is also very large scale, but you don't have that much time. And then we talked about floods, which is limited to river valleys. And I think one of the most challenging disasters that we experience in this country is with regard to landslides. People getting buried by mountains coming down. So that's a very localized phenomenon, and the warning time is actually quite problematic, because when I looked at the Koslanda landslide that happened just a few years ago, people actually had been given the warnings. They had been even given rain gauges, right? The thing was that they didn't move. The problem is, you have to ask the question in a very empathetic manner and say, why did they not move? I mean, it's not like they wanted to collectively commit suicide. They didn't have options about where to go. That's one thing. And the information wasn't precise enough, right? It said, if the water level goes up above this much, maybe in the next day, the mountain might come down, that kind of stuff. So I think what we really need to do at this stage, I think the Major General was very clear. We have to think about the least of our brethren. We have to think about the weakest of our citizens. We have to think about the disabled. We have to think about the people who are hard of hearing. We have to think about the people who are in wheelchairs. And that's a significant percentage of our population. So we have to figure out, how do we get those people, how do we communicate to those people, and how do we construct messages that will be persuasive for them, and how do we establish the trust, which I think a lot of my colleagues here on the panel, how do we build the trust so that when the government says move, they'll move? So I think this is the area that actually my organization, our work is now focusing on, is on message design, on trust, and what leads to the building up of trust. So I think these are the sort of the cutting edge areas that we need to go through. It's not like, you can fix this with AI per se. As I said, AI can play a role in improving the modeling that is underneath. But when it comes to actual communication of messages, our objective is not to just communicate, but to take people out of harm's way. So that's a very significant thing. And I'll just leave you with this one thought. We were in certain villages with Sarvodaya after the tsunami, and we found people who could not actually lock their houses. Their houses were such that they could not be locked. ඉතින් මහත්තයා අපි කොහෙද යන්නේ? අපි ගියහම මේක හොල්ලකයි නේද? Right? I mean, that's a real problem that people in Colombo can't understand. Right? That's a real issue that people have. So law and order, the trust that the police and the security forces will ensure that people are not robbed when they evacuate, is also part of this overall equation, which I think we need to think about. That goes beyond technology. But I think we can use technology to build up that trust.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that's a very good starting point for user. Like you are the focal point in disaster risk communication and disaster management in Sri Lanka. So trust is how do you gain the trust of the community and reaching the last mile.
Once again, I'll start from the professors. Our system should be top-down analysis, top-down scientific analysis, top-down technical evaluations, top-down studies and planning, but bottom-up execution. If we don't have the bottom-up execution, you are not going to be successful. Having said that, all the top-down scientific, technical theories and planning, all that is useless if we don't have the community engagement. Connecting with the community engagement with the media, we have community reporters, we have community freelance media workers. They also should be part of this community engagement. So community engagement is very important, and when we have the community engagement, reaching that last vulnerable person, they should know where the safeguards are. And when it comes to this safeguard, it's not only the physical safeguards, it should be their properties, their houses, and even when they move to their safety center, their safeguards even at the safety centers. For that, we should have proper analyzed action plans. To have the proper analyzed action plans, of course, when we did our last tsunami tabletop exercise, we went even down to the ceiling of the areas, no move areas, restricted areas, and the evacuation paths and evacuation lines. Then coming on to the winning the confidence of the people, once again, the professor spoke about the landslide danger areas, why people are not moving out. I think we have already identified and treated that subject. Now we are in a scenario, we are developed situations, the warnings are given, awareness are being done, and if they are not moving out, we have to even go and physically move them out. We are going down to that kind of a situation, because if people are not listening in danger scenarios, we cannot just say, no, we told them, they are not going. No, that's not the case. That's not the way. We have a responsibility to the people. Even if the man is not listening to us, we are responsible to make sure that the man is safe and he is evacuated. So that kind of scenario is also being worked out. So my message is community engagement, winning the confidence of the people, top-down analysis, scientific studies, technologies and planning, all that, but it must be bottom-up execution from the ground level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And then I'm looking at the time over there. It's like we are almost there to end this. And then I know, Shevan, you can speak well, but where the Major General ended, like his discussion, where the community engagement. So you developed, actually, your network developed a community-based, I think, more strongest community-based networks ever built by a media channels. So why and how you developed it, and also I want to touch a little about this ethics and social responsibility in reporting.
So
Be mindful about the time as well.
yeah, of course. Yeah. So 10 minutes I can speak for 9, right? So yeah, the social, the grassroots movement is obviously Gammed. It was born out of Sahanyatra because we began to see that there was something radically wrong in the human development indices we were seeing. We were being told that there's such a high literacy rate. We've been told that there's this relatively high per capita GDP, that healthcare and education was at a certain level. But what we were seeing to our own eyes in the villages was something completely different, like what Professor Samarji mentioned. And once you start seeing that, you can't unsee it. You want to do something about it. So over 10 years ago, we decided that we would walk from village to village, from home to home, just asking a simple question: what's life like for you? And we were lucky and fortunate to be partnered with by the University of Peradeniya, where we collated this information. And out of this information, out of this data, is what prompted us to then try to solve and resolve some of these issues. So really, we can't take any credit for it because Gammed is an effort by the people itself. The leadership comes from the community. The sponsorship comes from the community. All we do is just offer some leadership where it's required. So it's been very successful, and we've just got started, to be honest. About ethics, it's a really important question. It's a very difficult question when you're involved in the media today, particularly, because it's very easy to compromise on ethics for ratings and sponsorships and just eyeballs. It's very easy. It's a very simple thing to harvest people's attention by making wrong decisions ethically. It's very easy. So it's difficult to make a call that you're not going to do something, knowing fully well that the eyeballs may go to your competitor. And that has lots of impacts. Number one, obviously you lose your audience. Number two, you lose your only source of revenue, which is advertising. And at the end of the day, we have people to feed, we have families, our employees also have families, and it has an impact, without a doubt. But I'm really proud that I work for a company which has a chairman that makes the hard call all the time and says, no, that's okay. As Professor Samarji was said, the intention is to help people and get them out of harm's way. And we believe that eventually people will see the truth, and eventually that will mean that we will succeed as a media network. So we take the ethical call all the time. I'm not saying we get it right all the time. There are times where we might get it wrong, but the intention is always in the right place, to report the right thing, the truth by the people. And I think if we are to go back to a very simple, basic principle, which is something we all believe in, and this whole country is founded in, and that is Buddhism, which is based on the simple philosophy of the truth by the fact. So if we follow the facts, the truth will be revealed and lies will be exposed. And that's the philosophy that Sirasa will and always will continue to report on. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivan. That really admire that philosophy of having the focus on the long-term credibility against the short-term mileage. So with that, I will be moving into Mr. Kaluwewa. So, Mr. Kaluwewa, we have noticed that you are taking very drastic actions on time. Whenever there is an issue, you are issuing the guidelines, the protocols, and updating them on time with time. So, how it important to having these frameworks to when it comes to the reporting?
Yes, doctor. The issue is like that. I'm very much optimistic because Sri Lanka, as I start my kind of presentation, we are having a structure there. We are having a structure, not like many other countries, but we are having a structure. But only thing to what extent now we are going to use that structure for disaster communication and all these efforts. So our entire success depend on that. So not only that, to what extent we can kind of sustain all these establishments. That is very vital question we are having, because with this experience now, especially with the COVID and all, we have tested most of these systems nowadays. But if we can sustain even after COVID era, even if we can sustain these systems, I think that is the most challenging aspect we have to face, because we have to all the time we have to keep the momentum as well as the sustainability. Because time to come, then people can lose the interest, and then we have to start from the zero again. So in order to avoid that, as general suggests, that we have to form the frameworks, networks, and everything in place. So with regard to the challenges what we are facing, and actually I'm not saying that we are not facing challenges, especially with the disaster communication, because Sri Lanka is even at present, Sri Lanka is unfortunately we don't have ethical media ethics accepted by all the parties. It doesn't mean that some media organization, they are having their own ethical codes, but there is no nationally accepted ethics. So that is one challenge we are facing. And also, the disaster communication is not limited to just issuing official communication and all. Other than that, there is a very huge role which needs to play by the media personalities. But I feel that there is a kind of a little gap there when we consider the academic backgrounds of this media disaster communication. So in coming years, or in the coming months, if we can concentrate on that aspect also, if our media personalities can have that academic background into certain extent, I think that will definitely useful for the sustainability of all this effort. That is all. I'm very much optimistic, and I feel that Sri Lanka is having the system, and that is we have tested it.
Yeah. I am 100% sir. I agree with you, sir. It is like I have noticed the very drastic measures, and they were really successful. So there are questions from the audience, from the participants. Like if we ignore them, that is also not good. But I am struggling with the time also. So one question from you, Professor, is like, can you please brief on importance of machine learning and AI for supporting knowledge management in disaster management? I think you can talk about hours about this topic, but in a essence, like in a brief couple of sentences.
Yeah, basically, I think the example that I gave, in a way, I may have answered the question. It's in developing good models in the hazard detection and monitoring area. I think there is a clear possibility of using it. We are also looking at the possibilities of using some machine learning techniques with regard to, say, for example, Facebook connections and so on, which can allow us to see how the groups are functioning and so on. So that's a kind of a bit of a stretch. I think there are possibilities, but in order to give time for others, I'll stop it there. I'd be happy to talk about it. And
thank you very much, Professor. And then Siobhan, a question for you. How media can be used as a two-way communication tool and support in decision making for disaster response? I think you touched. Yeah. I think we can skip, because I don't want to pass the mic to you. So, Major General Sudanta, a question for you. The last mile of early warning system approach is utilized when sufficient materials are available and sufficient efforts are provided into implementation. How can we contrast this against first mile approach, which places the vulnerable communities in providing information when stepping up the early warning systems?
Yes, it's pre, during, and post, 3 scenarios. It's the identifying the real vulnerable community and the location where the disaster will strike. That is the pre thing, identifying the place, then concentrating and mustering, and we in military we call it forward positioning of resources, and evacuation, timely evacuation. Then post is that's another organization where couldn't mention. There is an organization called National Disaster Relief Center that is also under me, where we have another completely different way of looking after people, vulnerable people and affected people, from the time the effect is on until he or she gets back to his own house or maybe to a new house.
Right, thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Nalaka, there is a question for you. Role of media on early warning leading to search and rescue, etc., is well highlighted. How about its role in DRR, disaster risk reduction, as part of medium to long-term strategies and education?
Yes, at the moment we are mainly concentrating on not much about the mitigation and its preparedness, but as we are mainly as a government information dissemination center, we are mainly focusing on the preparedness and the response. Mainly, that is where we are mainly focusing on. But I believe that we are having a part, or we are having a role to play that aspect also. And I think with the understanding of all the media organizations and with the very good understanding with our stakeholders, especially with this disaster situation, with all other stakeholders, I think we are having a very good high potential to involve with that aspect also, then the responses and other preparedness measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaluwewa. And with that, I wish we had some more time to discuss about these points, but we are running out of time. So therefore, with that note, I would like to thank my panelists for giving their valuable time for the discussion today. Professor Rohan Samarajiva, Major General Sudhanta Ranasinghe, Mr. Chewan Daniel, and Mr. Nalaka Kaluwewa. Thank you very much for sharing your valuable knowledge with us. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandaka, for moderating that very informative session, of course, on the International Symposium on Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction. Of course, that was the conclusion of the fourth plenary session. There is one more left, and of course,